We're back for another episode of the Hourglass Podcast, where family law and psychology intersect.
You've got to decide, how do I celebrate the Yuletide season this year? Who do I buy gifts for? Who do I take off my list? Should I plan my festivities in keeping with the ones from years past? Will I spend my time with the same people? Will I go to the same places, prepare the same celebratory feast? Or will everything be drastically different? Next up, we have two terrific guests, Cheryl Eskin and Tracie Andrews. Cheryl Karp Eskin, LMFT, is the Senior Director of TeenLine, the global leading teen-to-teen peer support line operated by D.D. Hirsch Mental Health Services, as well as the co-chair of the Los Angeles Suicide Prevention Network. She began her mental health career as a TeenLine listener at the age of 14 and has worked as a licensed marriage and family therapist for more than 20 years. Tracie Andrews is a licensed clinical social worker with the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health. Her role as a mental health clinical supervisor with the Prevention and Outcomes Division, Family and Community Partnership Unit, Tracie is the lead for anti-stigma, suicide prevention, and health neighborhoods. She also currently serves as co-chair for the Los Angeles County Suicide Prevention Network. The two are here to talk to us about a very important topic, one that is difficult to talk about sometimes, suicide. Tracie and Cheryl are going to offer us information on how to spot the signs that a person may be considering suicide and how to help them. Let's get right to it, ladies. Here are my questions. What are some of the red flags or signals that you yourself or someone you know is susceptible to suicide?
I think the biggest thing we want to look for is a change in behavior, in attitude, in mood, in appearance. Someone who generally is outgoing, who now is isolating, someone who really cared about their appearance, who now is not showering or taking care of themselves. If it's teenager, someone who cared about grades, who isn't caring anymore, just an abrupt departure in personality makes us always question what's going on with this person. Is a time to definitely check in as well. Hopeless and helpless comments, things like, I wish I weren't here anymore, or
right.
It just, no one would miss me if I were gone. What's the point? What's the purpose? Those are definitely all things we want to look for and pay attention to.
Sure. Is it usually one event that could cause a person to choose suicide, or is it a building up or a confluence of events that converge all at one time?
Yeah, there's no one cause for suicide. And I think for a lot of us, we try to figure out that one piece. It was like, it was that breakup. It was that bad grade. It was that argument. It was that fight. It's never that simple. It's not one thing. So if you think of in terms of like playing Jenga, when you're playing the game, right?
Yeah.
You're taking pieces, but you're making the foundation a little bit unsturdy, right? But you're still intact. And then you get to that last piece and it breaks and it all falls. It's not necessarily that last piece, right? It was all of the buildup to that last piece for it to fall. So it's never that simple where one thing is the sole reason for someone dying by suicide.
Right. And what are some of the behaviors that indicate a person is suicidal, even if they're not expressing it verbally?
I mean, going back to what I had said before, just a change in who they used to be, the comments that they might make, isolating a lot more, not planning for the future, potentially giving away possessions, or even writing wills. Sometimes we see things like writing or talking or even posting about death, or on social media or to friends and dropping. We do know a lot of the times it's hard. A lot of times people who do die by suicide or attempt suicide do leave warning signs. We just need to know what to look. We do need to know what to look for.
Sure. What kinds of things should you do or say to someone who you think might be going down this road towards suicide?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, there's not a one-size-fits-all statement to say, right? I think for a lot of times we try to find that one right thing to say.
Right.
There's never the right thing to say. There's just not the wrong thing to say, right? Okay. So, like, we want to check in on people. One of the things we also have to remember is our relationship with people. It's about communicating all of the time. And so one of the things we want to ask, like, how are you doing? But we also want to get directly to those questions if we're starting to see significant change in somebody. Sure. So we can start it by saying, if we're more comfortable with saying something like, you know, are you feeling okay? And a lot of times you'll hear people say, do you want to hurt yourself? That's not the same thing as asking somebody if they want to die. There's a big difference between asking somebody if they want to hurt themselves and if they want to die by suicide.
Sure.
But if you are more comfortable with starting with, do you want to hurt yourself? Have you been thinking about things? And then you build your way up to actually asking the question, have you been thinking about dying? Have you been thinking about wanting to die? We have to be able to ask those straightforward questions. And sometimes, for some of us, it's easier to ask that straightforward question, and sometimes for some of us we need to ask a couple of questions before we can get comfortable.
Right.
The point is that we have to be comfortable asking the question, because the person that we're talking to is gonna pick up on if we're comfortable or not.
Sure.
And so if we say something like, you don't want to die, right? You're not thinking about suicide, right? We've already stopped that conversation from happening. And so we have to just be very mindful of what we want to ask. Are we able to hear it? Are we prepared for it? And maybe we're not that person to ask.
Right.
And so also being able to understand in that relationship, am I the right person to ask this question?
Sure. And at any point, should you start asking, have you considered how you might try to harm yourself? Have you thought about how you would try to kill yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to?
Definitely. I mean, I think one of the things to remember, whether you're a parent raising a child or just in communication, is the best time to talk about suicide and mental health is when you're not worried about it. So creating that open dialogue early on where your family is an okay place to express emotions and feelings, and that you know that there are resources for you if you are struggling, and how important it is to talk to people when you're struggling. But definitely the takeaway, like Tracie said, is not being afraid to ask the tough questions. Honestly, as a parent, the hardest question you'll ever ask, but if you're able to do so in a calm, non-judgmental way, usually people will tell you the truth. Yeah. And they'll feel so relieved that you see them in their moment of pain and you're willing to sit there with them. Yeah. But yes, to answer your earlier question, if someone says, yes, I'm thinking about it, then we do want to get into assessing what have you thought about doing? Because we do know, a person who has a more concrete plan or a lethal plan, definitely something we do need to take seriously and work with them. So we do want to get into those questions. Again, staying as calm and not judgmental as possible and not leaving that person alone as well.
Right. And then what's the next step? If you get to that point that you don't want to leave them alone, you think there is a danger, what's the next step? Who do you call?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, again, there's not a one size fits all. So I think it kind of depends on your network, your support. Are you already connected to mental health services? Are you connected to something where you feel like you can get support, for your mental health? What level of support is needed at this time? And so to Cheryl's point, asking, do you have a plan? Is there a method? Do you have means? All of these are really important things.
Yeah.
One of the things that's really important is a safety plan. And just making sure that you as a family are going through this process and figuring out how can we keep this person safe. And so there's not a one size fits all. It really is, you have to have open communication and you need to be talking about this the whole time. But we also know that mental health services help. But for some people, there's a stigma about receiving mental health services. For some people, that's not the avenue that they want to take. And so how else can we explore? What other services might be appropriate for you? What role does clergy or faith-based play in your life? What role do certain support systems play in your life? And so it's having a conversation to figure out what is that person who is in intense pain, what do they need, and how can we help them through this moment?
Okay.
Yeah. And similar to what Tracie was saying, particularly if there's not a political discussion, but if there's guns in the home, guns we know are the most lethal means to die by suicide. So removing things that could be harmful from the home with that person in the moment. There also are a lot of resources out there. 988 is what used to be National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. They're available 24/7 to talk to you or somebody else who's struggling in that moment and can connect you with resources. Teen Line, where I'm from, is a teen-to-teen resource. So if it's a teen who's struggling, that's 6 to 10 every night to talk to someone to get them connected to other help. Right. There's also, emergency rooms and psychiatric facilities if it feels like this person isn't safe in the moment. But also agreeing with Tracie that, figuring out what works for that person in the moment. But taking it seriously is really what we want to think about exploring. Also asking questions like, have they attempted before? Because
Right.
that's an important thing to know. A lot of times, that's the biggest predictor of someone attempting again, is if they've attempted before. And there's a lot of people who do attempt who don't go on to attempt again or die by suicide. But there's many who do, and they didn't get the help they needed. Now this time they're going to try harder, for lack of a better word, and do something that really is harmful.
And I would just add to the what Cheryl is saying, that the resources, the warm lines are fantastic. And so, Department of Mental Health has a warm line that you can call in, and you can talk to a trained listener who can just provide support. They're not a crisis line, but they're a warm line just if you need support. But 988 is fantastic because not only are they a warm line, but they're also a crisis line.
Yes.
You don't have to be in crisis to reach out to a warm line. You don't even have to be in crisis to reach out to 988. So there are services that are less invasive and less intense to start off. But there's also texting that's available. 741-741. If you text help to 741-741, that's a great resource. And so, again, it's figuring out what does that person connect to. Would they rather talk to somebody, or would they rather text with somebody? And sometimes texting is a little less invasive at first, and then maybe they move on to talking to someone. Yeah. And that could be the step towards, going into mental health services to actually start talking with a therapist.
Yeah. It seems like the option of having a warm line, of not having to call in the police and the ambulance and the psychiatric hospital into the situation, that's something that people maybe don't know about and could be using.
Yeah, so we have a couple of options that Cheryl had mentioned. So we have the DMH warm line at 1-800-854-7771, and you get to talk to trained listeners. It's a warm line, so it's not treated as a crisis line like 988 is a crisis line. Right. However, it is also a warm line. So you have options as far as picking up the phone and talking to trained professionals that can listen to you and just have a conversation with you. And if calling by phone doesn't work, we also have texting options. You could also text home to 741-741, and there you're not talking to someone on the phone, but you're able to text them. So if that feels more comfortable in that moment, you can do that.
Right. Now, is there a time of year that suicide is more prevalent? Is it before the holidays, after the holidays, or is it just something you have to look out for?
Yeah, what we see, it's a lot of people think that suicides spike in the holiday season. That actually is generally a myth. Oh. Generally, the holiday season is a time of connectedness and a time of, coming together. Obviously, not everybody has that connectedness and coming together. So people are struggling. It can definitely be a struggle. It also, though, in some ways takes a measure of energy to choose to die by suicide. In the winter months, when everything's kind of slow and calm, there might not be that, it might not be that high a need. We usually see suicide spike in the spring, when the weather starts to change and your internal mood doesn't necessarily match the external environment. So we do see that. Adults, it also could be related to tax time, other times of year. What we do see, interestingly, in teens, psychiatric hospitalizations spike in September generally, which is the back to school time. So, and that's not necessarily deaths by suicide, but we do see that's a time of year for teens to really be, struggling. So any time of year, we need to keep track of our loved ones and people in our life and be concerned. But we usually do see the spike in the spring.
Okay, so and you mentioned teens. So how can you tell when a teen might be at risk of attempting suicide? I've raised two daughters who are now off on their own, and I remember they didn't talk to me a lot as teenagers. So how do you deal with a teen that you think might be at risk?
Yeah, that's difficult. Obviously, teens can be, by nature of being teens, can be moody and temperamental and self-centered and all those things that, are hard and not always want to talk to their parents. And that was going back to earlier, just saying, creating that open dialogue in your home, that you do talk about mental health, you do talk about things going on in the world and in their peer group and in their friends, and knowing that your home is a safe space for them to come to and to be there with you. Tracie and I were also talking about doing, fun things with your kids. It doesn't always have to be this, like, how are you doing? Check-in, pressured discussion. Car rides are often a great time for conversation because you're not looking at one another, or participating in activities that they like to do, even if they aren't your preferred activities. Those can be a great way some of those conversations come up naturally in that. Also, I think with teens, that unconditional love piece, it's hard to be a teen, and reminding them, you as a parent don't always have to like their actions or even them at that very moment, but you do have their back and you are going to be there for them. Keeping in touch who their friends are, teachers, creating a support village. And if you're not the person they feel comfortable talking to, making sure there's someone in their life that they are comfortable, whether it's an aunt or a close family friend, someone of that sort.
Sure, all that makes sense. Are there talking points you can offer in terms of trying to soothe a troubled teen who might be grappling with thoughts of suicide?
No, go ahead.
What we hear most, and I have 2 teens of my own, what we hear most from teens is that parents don't listen.
Right.
We just want to fix. We want to tell them what to do.
Sure.
We want to, don't feel that way. It's not that big a deal. And when you're a teen, it is a really big deal.
Right.
And when someone's telling you not to feel that way, that doesn't work. When someone tells you to relax, do you relax? No.
Right.
It just usually annoys you, or maybe that's me.
Yeah.
But so I think being able to sit and listen and not jumping in so much to fix, just, I'm here for you, I'm with you in this, and even asking them, what do you need from me right now?
Right.
Do you want me to listen to you? Do you want me to give a suggestion? Sometimes if your teen will let you hug them, sometimes physical comfort can also be just healing, just healing as well. So I know you had stuff to add, so.
No, it's along the same lines as just connecting, and I think we talked about it, Cheryl and I talked about it before, like, when you're a new parent, you have this baby, right? And you're so, even if like the first child, right? It's like everything is like, oh my gosh, and you every step of the way, right? And that second child comes along, you're like, okay, I got this. I feel better. I feel a little bit better. And we tend to think like as they get older, we can kind of back off a little bit. And what we're seeing is like, no, kids really want us to still be connected. And so we have to figure out through that journey of how to stay connected and making sure that it's a genuine connection. And that we also have to kind of change as our kid is changing. So we might have loved Disneyland, at age 7, but maybe now we're really into sports. And so making sure that we don't stay as parents kind of stuck in the thing that maybe we felt connected to as they were little, but also finding ways to stay connected as they get older. Yeah. Because it makes it a little bit harder when we start to see our kids slipping away or we see distinct changes in them. And we want them to just accept that we're asking them a question and to give it to us. But now they're a little bit guarded. And so now we have to figure out how to connect with them. So it's really important to do certain things. I'm trying, like, this is a totally different world, but like this social media world is different. Yeah. Figuring out the language, figuring out the lingo, maybe watching some TikTok videos with your kids and just figuring out ways to connect so that when you need to have some of those more difficult conversations, there's connection there because that's genuine. And people know when you care and when you're really connected and when it just feels like you're asking just to ask. Right. I think the other thing I just want to keep in mind is like, there are cultural differences here too. For some cultures, we don't talk about feelings. We don't talk about difficult things. And so when we're looking for red flags, if you were brought up in a culture where you didn't talk about those things, maybe you're still not talking about those things. So maybe that wouldn't be a red flag. But really understanding your kid and knowing where the changes are coming are a really important thing. And when I say culture, I'm not talking just about race. We have family culture. We have friend culture. We have all these different components of culture. And even within those different components, it can be different, right? And so really getting connected and figuring out what's going on with your kid and that culture is an important thing.
I also hear a lot from teens, parents minimize how hard it is to be a teen.
Sure.
Especially, it's not easy to be an adult and we have a lot of responsibilities they don't. And you hear a lot from parents, you think you had it hard, I had to work 2 jobs and I had this and I had that. Your life is not so hard. But it is hard to be a teen. There's a huge pressure, whether they're college bound or workforce bound, social media, racial justice issues, Roe v. Wade. There's so much existential crises to be a teen. So I think recognizing that as a parent too, that as hard as it might be to be you, it's hard to be them as well. I've also heard a great analogy of the teens want a potted plant parent in the sense that they're just there. They're not really talking or doing anything, but they know they're there when they can come to and they need something. Not in their face all the moment, but there when they, there when they need it.
Right. Amazing tips from both of you in dealing with teens. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you want our viewers and listeners to know, either about teen suicide, or adult suicide?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot we haven't talked about. I think there's a lot we haven't talked about. So I guess that's an invitation for us to come back, right? We just invited ourselves back. Okay.
I never said the teen line number, so I was going to put that in. Teen line is 1-800-852-8336, or you can text teen to 839-863, and that's 6 to 10 every night Pacific Standard Time. I usually say, I mean, if there's one thing people take away from this conversation is not being afraid to ask or talk about suicide.
Sure.
That talking about it does not put the idea in someone's head, because you also don't ask it out of isolation. It's you're noticing things, or you're concerned, or you've seen things that lead you to wonder. So if you ask again, like Tracie said, in that calm, not judgmental way, he generally will tell you the truth and be so relieved and feel less alone that you've asked. So not being afraid, you're not putting the idea at anyone's head. We're just not that susceptible. It's not like, oh, gee, I never thought of it before. Great idea. Thanks. I mean, that's not how we work. So.
Yeah, and I would just say, just keep being curious as parents. Stay in that curiosity with your kids. And, you know, Cheryl said earlier, don't get into the, well, I had it harder than you and than you have. That's not going to be helpful for anyone. And so, you know, just again, connection is everything for adults and for teens. We're wired for connection. And so it's a really important thing. So if you as a parent feel disconnected, where's your connection and how can you help yourself? Because in order to ask some of these difficult questions, we have to be okay too. And so making sure that we're okay and seeing where we need some support for ourselves so that we can be there for our kids. If we are seeing some of these things that are concerning, even if it's not suicide, even if it's just a change of behavior, how can we still be there for our kid or our kids in a way that they need us? And we can only be helpful for our kids and for people in our lives if we're okay.
Right.
You know, and so we have to really make sure that we're checking in on ourselves too.
Right. That oxygen mask first.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
And,
you know, and modeling also to your kids how you take care of yourself.
And it's hard.
Yeah,
and it's hard. You know, we
Absolutely.
can't sit here and say like, oh, that's such an easy thing to do. It's hard.
Right.
And you need people to be able to say, Cheryl, are you okay today? Or, you know, Tracie, what are you wearing? You know, like you need to be able to check in on people and say like, you know, are you okay? And that's how we can help take care of each other, because it's a tribe. It's not a one system. It's not a one family. It really, this is a conversation that's for everybody. Suicide touches everybody. Whether you've lost somebody, you know somebody who's attempted suicide. Suicide is something that we all need to be able to have a conversation about, because it's about mental health. It's about mental wellness. Right. It's not about diagnoses necessarily. It's about wellness. And so just making sure that we're connected and we have the supports that we need.
Excellently stated, and a good time to sign off. Thanks so much to both of you for coming in, and we're going to have you back in the future to get more into that. What didn't we talk about?
Absolutely.
Sounds great. We'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Great.